everyone, I'm Sabiha, a Core Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador from United Arab Emirates. Today, we're going to take a look at p5.js and how you can get started creating interactive graphics and art. Before we even get started, let's take a look at what we will be covering today. We'll start off with what exactly is p5.js, the steps that you need to follow to get started, some of the features that are offered by the library, and finally, use all of that knowledge in order to create a very simple sketch in p5.js. So, what exactly is p5.js? p5.js is a free and open source JavaScript library that you can use to create all sorts of art and graphics with just a few lines of code. One of its main aims was to make coding much more simpler and accessible to people who are just beginners or people who come from much more creative careers such as artists. If you always wanted to learn or get started with programming but felt like everything was very difficult and not very visual, learning to program with p5.js is a great way to get started, especially because of how visual the library is. What do I mean by visual? Let's take a look at few of the examples that were created using this library. Here we have a recreation of Conway's Game of Life, a recursive tree, and even some moving particles that were created with nothing but p5.js and some JavaScript knowledge. So really, the possibilities are pretty endless. To get started, there are two ways you could do this. You could head to the download section on p5.js website and download the p5.js complete. After this, you can open it in a code editor of your choice. Or the other option is you go directly to the online editor which is on the p5.js website where you can code directly in your browser. So without even needing to know how to set up something on your computer, you could go to this online editor and get started with creating interactive art and graphics. Today, we will be using this editor in the session. Anytime you open the online editor or the downloaded code, you will notice that there will be two main files. One is the sketch.js and the other is the index.html. The sketch.js is where you will be writing the JavaScript code to create all the graphics and animations, whereas the index.html is where you can see the result of all the code that you've written so far visually. So knowing these two elements is very crucial to understanding how a p5.js program or a sketch works. Now that you have a better understanding of how the overall structure looks like, let's take a look at sketch.js in depth. When you open the online editor, you're going to have the following snippet already displayed. The code has two sections. First is the setup, and the second is the draw. The lifecycle of a p5.js works something like this. Anything that you add within the setup function is called just once at the beginning of the program, while the draw function is called about 60 times per second by default. This value can be changed later in the code by adjusting the frame rate. But this is how the default p5.js is set up. Another thing you might have noticed is the create canvas line in the setup function. This is because to create any sort of art or drawing, you would need a canvas or a space to create it on. This is very similar to the canvas that's used in p5.js. It's basically a space for you to create what you want. So you could create your graphics, you could create shapes, animations, all on this canvas. Now let's jump back to the code editor on the p5.js website and get started by trying out a few of the features that are provided by the library. So here we have the editor and we can see the snippet of code that's already there. Let's try to run it. When we run it, we can see a grayish background that's displayed on the right-hand side, but it doesn't look that great. So what can we do with p5.js to make this better? We could change the color of the background. To do this, I'm just going to change the background color attribute to add a value called 255,0,0. And this is like declaring the RGB value. So now when I run it, I can see that the code has made the background appear as a red color. Now, just changing the color is not that great. So let's try to add in some shapes. I'm going to add in the ellipse by adding the ellipse or using the ellipse function. Give it a few properties. So where do I want to place the ellipse? I want to place it exactly in the middle of this canvas. So I'm going to give 200, 200, which is like saying the x and y position values, and 100, 100, which would be defining the radius. So in this case, we have made a circle by giving the same values at the end. So we have an ellipse and we have a good looking background, but the ellipse still looks pretty plain. In order to make it a bit more colorful, let's use the fill function in order to give a color to our ellipse, or in this case, a circle. And I'm going to give it a green color by using a RGB value as follows. Great, so now we have a green color circle and we have a nice background. Let's take a look at a few of the other shapes that are available in the p5.js library. One such shape is the line function. In order to create a line, I'm going to type in line and give it a value for the start point of the line and the end point of the line. So here I'm going to say an x1 value and a y1 value, which would be the start of the line, and the x2 value and the y2 value. Now when I run it, I can see that there is a line generated. Great. One more thing before we leave. Let's see if we could make this a bit more stand out by making the line and the border quite thick. To do that, we would use another function called the stroke weight in order to make the line and the borders quite thick. So I'm going to give a stroke weight of 5, and once I do that and I run the code, you would be able to notice that both of the shapes now are much more thicker and can be quite visible on screen. While these are some great simple functions that you could know and code within a few minutes, there are many more features using the p5.js that you could create with. So there are animations, you could make these shapes move along as you wish. So let's take a look at a few of the additional functionalities. So we used an RGB value to give the background color, but we could also say background and give just a singular value, and it would be the same as defining all of the RGB values with the same value. So if I say background of 220, it would be like saying background of 220, 220, 220. So that's another way you could easily give a background color for your canvas. While there are a few functions that you've already taken a look at, there are many more that you could play around with, such as the point and the rectangle, which are both very easy to define, similar to how we did our previous functions. So we could use a rectangle where we specify an x-coordinate, y-coordinate, a width, and a height. We could also create an ellipse, which in our case, we created a circle. And we could also play around with a few colors. So using something like stroke RGB would give the color of the border a different color depending on what you want it to be. So really, you could just test around and play and learn a lot. This would have served as a very simple introduction to p5.js, but there are so many more things that you could build. To learn more, you could head to the p5.js Learn page, which has a lot of examples that you could test along and follow along with. Additionally, you could also check out the Coding Train YouTube channel, where there are a lot of fun tutorials on how to build things such as a snake game or create snowflakes using p5.js. Or if you feel like you need to learn and brush up more on your JavaScript skills, you could head to the MS Learn JavaScript path. Finally, thank you for tuning in and feel free to reach out to me for any questions that you might have or anything else that you might want to know.